As above, so below.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm the founder of the Coincidence Project. I wrote a book, recent book called Meaningful Coincidences: How and Why Synchronicity and Serendipity Happen. I invite you to read it, and I also invite you to come to our website, thecoincidenceproject.net, thecoincidenceproject.net. And if you like to tell coincidence stories, we do that on Saturdays, the third Saturday of each month, 11 a.m. to 12:30 on the third Saturday of each month. And it's a great place to meet people who are also interested in hearing coincidence stories as well as telling their own. And my coincidence story for today, I title A Coincidence Warning. Sometimes coincidences are wonderful, and oh, look, it's great. I feel a wonderful connection with the universe, and it's a beautiful, luminescent kind of feeling. But sometimes they're kind of like a tap on the shoulder and say, maybe you better think about this again. And this one is one of those. I love dancing. Here in Charlottesville, our free-form version of dancing is based on 5 rhythms. You start slow, go fast, and end slow. It goes for about an hour and a half. Move however you feel. And sometimes a good way to get bad feelings out of you. In addition, things happen on the dance floor with other people as well as with the whole group. Energy gets exchanged, feeling aroused, connections made. About a year ago, a new wonderful dancer appeared, and slowly over time, we danced together. Amazingly wonderful. Amazingly wonderful. And so it continued. My heart opened up to her. And, after a year of dancing, occasionally each dance, she asked me to go for a walk with her. I readily agreed, knowing that outside the dance floor, relationships can be a little dangerous and treacherous. I suggested a time and day. I also texted her that I did not want to get hurt again because it's happened before with off the dance floor relationships. She said, I would never hurt you, Bernie. I said, okay. She loves poetry and writes poetry. And so she said, I'll send you a poem. So she sent me a poem she was working on at that time. And the title of the poem was All Relationships End in Heartbreak. I said, oh no, I don't want to do that. So I told her I didn't want to get hurt. And she says, it's going to end in heartbreak indirectly. And so it sounded like a hint. The fear of being hurt and the poem at around the same time. Did I heed that warning? Am I heeding that warning? Yes. I showed the poem to several friends, and that walk did not happen. Well, today we have a guest that I'm really delighted to be able to introduce to you. She's been on my audio version, but this is the first time we talk face to face on video, and she's been with the Coincidence Project, or at least the whole thing from the very beginning, because she's written one of the best books on coincidences that I know of. She is Sharon Hewitt Rawlette, and she's a philosopher and interdisciplinary researcher specializing in anomalous phenomena and their implications for our understanding of consciousness. She's a real philosopher, ladies and gentlemen. She earned her PhD in philosophy from New York University in 2008 and taught at Brandeis University before leaving academia for an independent writing career. And if you want to know what made her make that decision, read her book, The Source and Significance of Coincidences. It's quite a story, and she has lots of good stories in that book. She's also written The Supreme Victory of the Heart, a memoir, and Beyond Death, the best evidence for the survival of human consciousness. That was 2021, and it was a runner-up, and she was a runner-up with her essay for the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. It was the contest about evidence for life beyond death. Sharon, welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. Glad to see you again.
Thank you, Bernie. It's nice to be back. Thanks for asking me back.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Would you please tell us a coincidence story, Sharon?
Sure. Well, let me just say first, because you mentioned the Coincidence Project and how people can get together with you in that group once a month to share coincidence stories. And I just want to say what a wonderful time I have had when I have been able to join that group, and just what a pleasure it is to hear so many different kinds of stories and hear people kind of, trying to puzzle through, well, what does it mean? And to hear them talk about how they figured out what it meant and what effect it had later on in their life. So I really do encourage people, if they've never been part of that group, to think about checking it out, because it's a really unique experience.
Well, maybe you'll come again. We have one this next Saturday.
Yes. Saturday is not a great time for me now, but hopefully at some point in the future I'll be able
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for talking about it that positively. It's evolving, and there's a lot of things that I have in mind that we can do with it. So, those of you listening and watching, please do join us on the third Saturday of each month by going to thecoincidenceproject.net and signing up, registering, and hopefully we'll see you.
Yeah, because it's so easy to feel alone, I think, with your coincidence stories. A lot of people don't have a lot of people around them who can understand the value of those experiences. And this is a group where you've got a lot of people who really do understand that and will listen very compassionately and empathetically and understand, the value of what you experienced. So.
Yes.
So now let me share my coincidence story. So this is something that happened to me about a year ago. So it's actually two coincidences. So the first part of the coincidence is, I don't know, this was probably about 2 years ago. I just sort of offhandedly one day was thinking to myself, I guess I had maybe seen something about like some kind of retreat or conference having to do with parapsychological phenomena and things. And I was thinking, man, it would be really good. It'd be really cool to be able to go to that conference or be part of a retreat like that, and to be, physically in a room with a lot of people who are thinking about the same things that I am. It would be so stimulating. I was like, but I don't have the money to do that. Like a lot of these conferences and retreat centers, it costs a lot of money. And I was like, I don't have the ability to do that. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great? Like, it would just be awesome if, somebody would just invite me to come to one of these and like pay my way to go to it. And I thought, well, that could happen if I was invited to like lead a workshop or something. I was like, but I don't want to go as work. I want to just go and enjoy it. So I was like, well, that'll never happen. But it was just sort of this, idle little daydream. But there was some energy behind it, that, like, in the sense of like, it really felt good to me, this idea of doing this. But I thought, it's not ever going to happen.
Now, when you're saying that, are you also not saying that you would energize ideas and that helps make things happen?
I mean, maybe, but I wasn't doing it intentionally. Like, it really was just a very sort of idle thought. Like, it just came to me. I was like, I wish that could happen, but that can't happen. And so I just went on with my day. But I mean, maybe something happened in that moment, because it was, I think, within a year, maybe a year and a half after I had just had that thought, when I got invited to go to Essalen, which some people may know. It's a pretty famous retreat center on the West Coast in Big Sur, California. And I was invited to go as part of their Center for Theory and Research, which is specifically for for academics, researchers, researching, some of these sort of more fringe phenomena according to the mainstream. And it was all expenses paid, and you just come and spend like a week talking to other researchers in a very informal environment. And, I presented my research, for over maybe an hour, but most of the time it was just talking to all of these other, smart people who have had a lot of interesting experiences. And so it was a realization of this thing that I think my heart desired, but I didn't know how it could happen. And then it somehow manifested itself, right. So, I mean, it was a beautiful gift from the universe. Absolutely. It was just, it was one of the most beautiful weeks of my life up to this point. It was really wonderful. So that was sort of the first part of the coincidence. But then there was a thing that happened as I was traveling to Essalen. So I had some difficulties making the arrangements for travel. It was a little bit stressful, sort of getting everything set in my life so that I could actually go and do this. And so I finally fly out to San Francisco, and then I'm riding in a car down to Essalen. It just takes like 3 hours driving down the coast, but the Pacific Coast Highway, which is gorgeous. But as we were getting closer to where Essalen was, we started looking for the entrance to it. Like the GPS was telling us, like, it's here, it's to your right. And we're like, we don't see anything. And the person who was driving the car had never been there before either. So we're just kind of trying to figure this out. And we come up to this metal gate on the right-hand side of the road. And I kind of look at it and I'm like, well, I mean, that kind of looks like it might be a retreat center or a conference center of some kind, but there's no sign. And so I don't think it would be that. But then I see right next to the gate, there is a little mile marker sign. Now, I have to say, for those people who don't know my work, that I have a coincidence number. 33 is my number that shows up all the time, but particularly at important events in my life. So this mile marker that was right next to the gate said 33.0. Like, this was right at mile 33, this gate. And I saw that and I thought, this should be it. This should be, because it's marking this important event in my life. I knew that it was important that I was there, and it felt kind of like a reassurance with the travel stress and everything that I had been through. It was like saying, you're supposed to be here. We've made sure that you would arrive here. But I mean, the gate is closed. We're not going to go in here. It's unmarked except for this mile marker sign. So we keep driving, like maybe another quarter mile down the road, and there's a gate with the entrance to Essalen and all this stuff. So we go in there, and I go in to check in at the front desk, and very nice lady explains to me all this stuff about the property and stuff. And she says, now, your room, you're going to be staying in this cabin, and to get there, you're going to need to go back out onto the highway. You're going to need to go about a quarter of a mile back up the highway, the way that you came, and there's going to be an unmarked gate there, and you're going to go through there, and that's where you're staying. I was like, of course it is. So the 33 was correct, right? That was my turn, but I had to go check in at the front desk first.
Well, Ms. 33, I get a lot of questions from people about numbers, and I don't know really what to say about them, except they are significant. They are angel numbers that people describe. It could be 33. I mean, they like to have repeated numbers, but people have their favorites. Mine was 23. It looks like it might be coming back again. But what's with you and 33, Sharon?
So my relationship with that number started years ago. I guess at this point it's, I don't know, 13 years, something like that. And it was a number that came to me at a really difficult period in my life. I was going through a breakup, which actually was the subject of my memoir that you mentioned earlier. Because I wrote a book about it not just because it was a pivotal moment in my life, but because it was actually a very spiritually pivotal moment in my life, because it was such a difficult time that I felt like I really didn't know how to get through it on my own. And I mean, I could have, but well, I mean, I say that like, I mean, it's not like, I don't know how to explain it. It was a really difficult time. And in that difficult time, I started to have these coincidences with the number 33. There are various reasons for that, but I won't go into that. It's not really important. But at the time, I didn't believe in anything sort of other than the material world. I didn't believe in God. I used to when I was a kid, but I had decided as a young adult, that I didn't see any evidence that there was really anything other than the physical world. And so that wasn't on my radar. But I started having these experiences that would come at really important moments, and that seemed to come with this reassurance that everything is okay. Like, even though you're going through a really difficult time, everything is going to be fine, and you're not alone. You're taken care of. So they would come back over and over during that period of time, and so it's become for me this number that for me symbolizes that, like, divine providence, that divine care for me, and that idea of a plan. Because again, these numbers, the 33 seems to pop up specifically at pivotal moments in my life. So one other really fascinating time when it happened was when I wrote my first publication on the subject of coincidences. I wrote this academic paper for the Journal of Scientific Exploration, and I had been working on it for 2 or 3 years, really like a detailed paper about like the statistics of coincidences and how we should think about them. And I had submitted it to some different journals, like some mainstream philosophy journals, and they didn't want it. And then I submitted it to the Journal of Scientific Exploration, and it had been a while, like 6 months since I had submitted it, and I hadn't heard anything, and I was kind of worried about whether it was ever going to be published. But then finally, the JSE said that they wanted it. So it comes out, 2 or 3 years after I started writing the piece, and I get like the proofs for it, and I see that it is the very first article in volume 33 of the JSE. It is volume 33, number 1, the first article in that volume. And to me, it was just this, again, this little sort of wink saying, you felt like this was taking a long time, but it was always supposed to happen at this time. It was supposed to arrive in this issue of this journal, and everything is fine. Everything is right on time.
Well, that's when I hear people talk about numbers, it's often that they are reassurance to them. Mm-hmm. That you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing. That's the usual way I hear it, and hearing it from you again. So I think that's worth emphasizing how that works for a lot of people. But let's go on to another subject of yours. One of the weirdnesses that you've gotten into is survival, which is increasingly more interesting to people these days. More people paying attention to being able to communicate with loved ones who have died, have passed over, become spirits, is what we're talking about now. And Mr. Bigelow has a wife who died, and he's very much interested in being able to know that he can communicate with her and help put money out to get evidence for that possibility, not just for him, I think, but for a broader population. And you submitted an essay for that, which was you got one of the runner-up things, which we're all very, very happy for you that happened. And I wonder if because you focused in that paper a lot about coincidences and suggestions of survival. Why don't you tell us a couple of the stories that really impressed you as part of that essay that suggests that survival is a real thing?
Yeah. Well, first, I do want to say that I don't think that synchronicity or coincidence is the best evidence that there is for survival. I think if all we had was the coincidental evidence, that I don't think that I would believe that our spirits go on. But in the context of all of the other evidence that we have from all of these different phenomena, whether it's apparitions or dreams or mediumship or near-death experiences, memories of past lives, when you put all of that together and you see how all of it fits together into a coherent picture of survival of death, then when you bring synchronicity in there, it seems very clear that communication from a loved one who's passed on is the best explanation for certain coincidences that people experience.
That's good. Now, would you list more slowly the other evidence forms?
Yeah. So, apparitions that people experience of their deceased loved ones, whether that's seeing them or sometimes hearing them, or some people even feel their touch in some way, or might feel somehow like their spirit moving through their body in a way. So apparitions of various types.
Isn't that usually as the person is dying? Apparitions?
So a lot of apparitions do happen very soon after the death. So and in a lot of cases, it's when the person who sees the apparition doesn't even know that the person has died. Like their first indication that the death has happened is that they see the apparition. Sometimes the person either indicating that they are dying or how they are dying, or just saying goodbye, like I'm leaving. I wanted to say goodbye to you. I love you. So yeah, a lot of them do happen very close to the time of death. But then there are other ones that happen 5 years later, sometimes 10 years later. It just depends on the specific situation. But one of the things that's very interesting about those is that they do often bring this piece of verifiable information, whether it's about the person's death, that they have died, or sometimes it's verifiable information about something else that's happening in the person's life. So we can't explain them as just hallucinations or imagination. And the same goes for the next kind of after-death communication that people have, which is through dreams. This is probably the most common form of after-death communication, I think, from my experience. So, and these dreams, the ones about communication with our loved ones, they're a little bit different than normal dreams. There is a sort of deeper sense of reality and the presence of the person, and often there will be these verifiable pieces of information that come through them. So there are lots of reasons to think that they're not, again, just a normal dream where your mind is imagining this. Then you've got evidence that comes from mediumship, so from people who have a particular skill in being able to perceive people who are on the other side and to hear messages from them and are able to convey them. Actually, there's a form of communication I didn't mention in my quick list earlier, which is phone calls from the dead. This is actually, it sounds strange to anybody who hasn't had the experience, but this is a very common way in which people receive messages from their deceased loved ones. So they will get a call on the phone and they will pick it up and they will hear the voice of their deceased loved one. And sometimes it's just a few words. That's the most common is, it's maybe like 5 or 6 words, like one sentence. But then there are other people who are able to have an extended conversation. Actually, I have 2 very good friends who have both had this experience, and they actually had an extended conversation with the person. Now, it perhaps has something to do with both of them having very developed intuitive skills in general that made that extended conversation possible. But in any case, this is a very common way that people hear from their deceased loved ones. And these days, with text messaging becoming a thing, also text messages from the dead are becoming more common. Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds ridiculous. It sounds crazy. But it happens. And there are, like with the text messages, people get a text message that comes from the phone of the person who has died, even though they have that phone in their possession. The battery is completely drained. It's, they can see it, like it's sitting on, the dresser in their room. And so no one is using it. And yet a text message shows up on their phone from that phone and says something like, I'm okay, don't worry, or I love you. Like, so, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And it's not just like one person, like people report this all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the whole idea of what I do, is collect the stories. And one story is an anecdote, but several of them are evidence. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. And you're just providing the evidence and describing these. So please go on with some of the other ones.
Let's see. So I think those are the main categories of like third person experiences where you have somebody who has died communicating with you. But then there's also the first person kinds of evidence, which is the testimonies of people who have actually died and had the experience of still surviving. So the most well-known kind is near-death experiences, which are really just cases of temporary death or being near death. So some people have said, well, that doesn't really tell us what would happen if somebody, if their body was permanently dead, maybe they wouldn't be able to have that kind of experience. I'll go into some reasons why I don't think that that's true. But I will say that for me, the most convincing aspect of the near-death experiences, besides the fact that, again, people can obtain verifiable information while they're in this like out-of-body state, temporarily dead. Beyond that, there's the fact that near-death experiencers, including people who were completely skeptical about the existence of an afterlife, did not believe that God existed, did not believe there's anything other than this material world, and yet they have this near-death experience, and it completely changes their outlook. They're like, I was wrong, there is something else, and the rest of their life they are so interested in understanding more about this other aspect of existence and telling people about it. They're a different person when they come back from these experiences. So the near-death experiencers themselves are overwhelmingly convinced that experience means that we do not die when our bodies die. And that to me is very strong evidence. I mean, yes, it is secondhand. It's based on their testimony, but their testimony seems to be very, very strong. But then I think we can put that together with the testimony of people who have actually experienced the permanent death of their body. So this is people who have memories of having lived a previous life in a previous body. So these are, memories like the ones that were studied by Ian Stevenson, who, worked there at the University of Virginia, where you live and work, Bernie. And so these are people who remember their body being completely dead, and yet they have experiences like near-death experiencers report. They talk about the feeling of coming up out of their body, being able to still see events that are happening on Earth. Some of them talk about actually communicating with their loved ones that they've left behind on Earth. And we could talk about that in a minute, because some of those memories that they have of communicating with people on Earth can be verified by the people who receive the communications. So we've got two-step verification. And then they also have memories of having interactions with other people who are deceased on the other side. They have memories of viewing their parents, their future parents, the people that they are going to be born to in their next life. They see things that are happening in their life. And then they have memories, and this is not all of them, but there are people who have these memories of this time between incarnations, who have memories of actually entering the body of the baby that they are going to become in this new life. And so they have an experience, or they have experiences along this whole continuum between the previous life and the future life. And near-death experiencers also experience all of these same different things. We have actually some near-death experience cases where people whose bodies were temporarily dead actually were out of their body, and they witnessed the birth of a baby and were trying to kind of get into the body of this new baby and like become this child in exactly the way that these people with intermission memories talk about. But for whatever reason, they were not able to do it and ended up going back to their previous body. So there are all of these points of connection between the near-death experiencers and the people with memories of previous lives and intermission memories. So when you put all of this together, and you put all that together with the experiences that people have through mediumship and dreams and apparitions, to me, it makes a complete picture. It all fits together, and I don't think there's any simpler way to explain what's happening than to just say, well, what's happening is what it looks like is happening, which is that our mind doesn't disappear when the body dies. We are still conscious and able to perceive and able to make choices and to continue on with our mental and soul life. So
that's a beautiful summary, Sharon. That's a beautiful summary. So thanks for that. And what you said at the beginning of describing what you just did is that alone synchronicities are not enough evidence. Yeah. However, they bolster the evidence that you just brought to us. So why don't you tell us about the role of synchronicity in validating the idea?
Yeah, so once we have that backdrop of all of that other evidence, I think then you start looking at these experiences that people have where they feel like their loved one is communicating with them. Oftentimes it's through an animal of some kind. Butterflies and birds are very common signs that people feel like they're receiving from their loved ones. But it can also be electronic, like we talked about. It can be text messages. It can be all sorts of different things. But people generally, they experience this sort of coincidence of some kind. And at the same time, they have this sense of like, I feel like that's, my mom, or I feel like that's my sister. And so I think it's really important when somebody's experiencing this thing to not only tune into the actual event that's happening, but I really think that intuitive feeling that goes along with it is essential. This feeling of like, this is important. You need to pay attention to what's happening there, because the external event, the coincidence, whatever it is designed to get our attention, because we're very physically oriented. We're very visually oriented, like, and we live very busy lives. And so most of us are not paying attention to our intuitive feelings most of the time. So we need this physical happening in the external world to kind of be like, oh, that seems strange that that butterfly just landed on my arm and it won't go away. And, what's going on here? So we focus, and that helps us feel the presence of our loved one, and tune into this more intuitive way in which they are trying to get our attention and sending us, messages of love and just of their presence there. So I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not just a physical event. It's also this internal soul event that's happening, this soul communication. But let me give some cool examples, because that's what people want to hear. So one of the really cool examples that I included in my essay, and just so people know, so that essay, I published it as a book called Beyond Death, but the essay itself is available completely for free online from the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies website. So if you Google my name and Beyond Death, you should be able to find the PDF, which you can read. And this story and some other examples that I'll probably talk about are there, so you can read all of them. So this happened to a woman named Mary Helen Hensley. She's actually an author herself, and she's written about this, but I know her personally as well. And so several years ago, she's living in Ireland. She's an American. She is from Virginia, like the two of us. Well, you're not from Virginia, but you are now. Now you're a Virginian. So she's from Virginia, but she lives in Ireland now. And one day she just noticed that a couple of different people around her mentioned this place in Ireland that she had never heard of, called Mount Argus. And she was like, well, that's weird. Like, why is suddenly everyone talking about Mount Argus? What is this? So the next morning, her young daughter, she was maybe 8 or 9 years old, her young daughter wakes her up, and her daughter tells her that their resident ghost in their house, they have a resident ghost named Mr. Burke, apparently is someone who used to live in the house, and he's a friendly ghost, but he shows up from time to time as an apparition. And so Mary Helen's daughter told her, Mr. Burke came to see me this morning, and he gave me a clue about how to fix my cough. So she had been having this terrible, violent cough, like to the point where it was making her throw up sometimes because it was so violent. She said, Mr. Burke gave me a clue to how I can fix my cough. So Mary Helen was like, all right, well, what is it? And her daughter leads her out to the stairwell in this old house where they live. And there are these old bricks on the wall in the stairwell. And she points at one of them. She said, Mr. Burke told me to, show you this. And on the brick is written Mount Argus. So Mary Helen's like, okay, clearly there's something about Mount Argus. So she calls one of the people that she had heard talking about Mount Argus the previous day. She's like, what is Mount Argus? What is up with this? And the woman tells her that St. Charles of Mount Argus is a saint who is known for healing ailments of the chest. So Mary Helen's like, okay, there's a connection here, but what do I do about this? Well, later that day, somebody who didn't know anything about any of this,
Nobody,
and is not even a close friend. It was like a friend of a friend who'd maybe met her once or twice, came to her and said, something told me that you needed this, and gave her a little card with a relic from St. Charles of Mount Argus on it. So she took the card with the relic and she put it under her daughter's pillow, and she said that her daughter never had that cough again.
I laugh because there's stand-up comedy possibilities with a lot of these coincidence stories. They're just like, but they're not exactly what stand-up comedy does, but they're funny.
No, but yeah, you have to laugh because it's like, it's so like it's so out of our normal way of trying to solve problems and thinking the way that the world works. Even those of us who've had, crazy coincidence experiences in the past, like to just see it at work in such a perfect way. And it's just marvelous.
It's marvelous. It's marvelous. And
Yeah.
I think the laugh is you would know it as a ontological shock.
Yes, I think that's true. Yeah, laughter is a way to respond to ontological shock.
It's one way. Some people
Yes.
just go crazy too when
Right.
that happens.
Yeah.
A person contacted me with ontological shock because of a lot of synchronicities she's been having, and how that might disrupt her life, as they sometimes do.
Yeah.
So the laugh is almost like a ghost story. Oh, did I hear somebody tell me a ghost story? It's like it's so ludicrous that it's funny. It's low probability is what I would
Right.
just use the simple, not so much fun term, but it's a low probability thing outside of our realm of things. So this one, she gets Mount Argus from a friend of hers, or so, it comes into her life, and then the weirdest things are the ghost telling the daughter
Right.
uh, to go to this brick that says Mount Argus on it from Saint Michael, I guess,
Charles.
Charles of Saint of Ar, and then I love these stories of some stranger or a relative stranger in this case coming up to you and knowing that somehow you need this.
Hmm.
That I heard a story of a teenager about to commit suicide as he's going into a shop in Manhattan, New York, and somebody in New Jersey gets the message to go to this shop and help this kid not commit suicide, which he did. And then the kid who was a lot of trouble goes around to prisons telling people these stories, and the guys cry in the prison because they wish that would have happened to them,
Yeah.
that somebody would have intervened. Those are. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think one of the things that I love about this particular thing that happened to Mary Helen is that it's such a good example of the way that spirits of people who've passed on can influence our life through coincidences. So you sort of see this progression, right? So it's almost like he's first trying to suggest to them like Mount Argus. So like making people talk about Mount Argus around them, and maybe like Mary Helen will get the idea. She'll like look it up and she'll go there or something, but she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand what's happening. So then Mr. Burke, shows up and talks to her daughter and says, it's about my problem with my chest. Like Mount Argus is a clue for fixing that. And then she still doesn't know what to do with that. And so then this other person has to be brought in and prompted to, show up with this relic. So it's very clear the connection in this case, because we have this apparition who sort of explains the connection. But I think a lot of people just have the coincidental pieces, right? Like they just have, like everybody's talking about this, and then maybe somebody sort of does something or, presents them with an opportunity related to that. They follow up on it and it solves a problem that they had. And they don't ever really know sort of where that solution to the problem came from. Like it's just like, oh, well, isn't that lucky that, I figured this out, or, the universe solved this problem for me. But I think a lot of times it's actually, there are, specific people on the other side who are putting those clues in our path and are trying to nudge us along towards these solutions. It's not always as obvious in this case, but I think this case shows that that is an important origin for these kinds of events in our life.
It's so important in at least my way of thinking about coincidences. I like to be able to find ways of explaining them. And what you've just done, and a lot of people say the universe, which is very large.
Yes, it is.
and
Getting
by
larger all the time.
and getting larger all the time, faster than the speed of light. And it expands.
Yep.
But what they mean is some version of a higher intelligence when they say the universe. It's still ambiguous what this higher intelligence is. And as you know, it's hard to get outside this higher intelligence of which we're a part to be able to understand it. But we can stay in our place and begin to look at these things from our own ability to observe, our limited ability to observe. And here, a departed loved one has been the guide in all this. Who was the departed loved one in this story?
Oh, well, in this case, it wasn't somebody that they knew in life. I mean, it seems like they came to have a deep affection for him because he was just hanging around as a ghost all the time.
It was the ghost.
Right. It was the ghost.
It was the ghost. I mean, he was the family member helping make it happen. And somehow you're suggesting that this ghost brought this friend of a friend in to solidify what the ghost thought might be helpful. Now that's a bit of a fun thing for you to have to think about. Is how did the ghost get this friend of a friend to come in with just the right thing at the right time? The friend had this feeling, like the story I was telling you. He gets the feeling, and I love these stories when somebody gets the feeling to come up to somebody with something.
Yeah.
And I just how that works, and it's just the right thing, and I hear it often enough. So how do you think the ghost influenced this friend of a friend who was the right person, who had the relic, who had the thing to give?
Yeah.
How do you speculate that happened?
Well, I think that ultimately we are all very connected, that our minds are all connected to one another. There's, we tend to think about things in physical terms where, space and time separate things. Things are at different locations in space and time. But I think that the more fundamental reality of the world is this mind-based, consciousness-based reality where, in fact, there isn't spatial or even temporal separation, honestly, and where all of our minds are in continual connection with one another. And so we're able to communicate with each other on that other level that isn't visible to us. And that can create effects within the visible world.
Let's say that time and space are illusions for us here in 3 dimensions. It still doesn't get, when you say that, to the idea that the ghost could find the right guy in 3 dimensions to walk over. Mm-hmm. So it may be connected, but to me, it's still like dialing a radio and finding the right radio station. So the ghost is trying to find somebody who has the right information, who's in the 3-dimensional world close enough with the right thing to be able to then pop that person into an urge to come over to present the thing to the mother and the daughter.
So what I actually think happens here, I mean, at least in like broad terms, is I think that in that non-spatiotemporal reality of the mind, that things actually are accessible by thought and by intention. So if you have, the desire to help this girl heal from her cough, then it's like your intention is your intention is directly attracted to whatever the easiest path is for her to get to healing. Like it's like if you think about it, when you're in a dream, right? Just a normal dream. It's not like paranormal in any way, but you're in a normal dream. If you think about something in the dream, or you start wondering about something, suddenly you see that thing happen, or you're in that place, or you're talking to that person, or whatever. It's like your thought automatically actualizes itself in the dream. And I think that that's actually what happens in waking life, in the physical world, there's sort of this delay that happens, but it's still like your thought is seeking its realization. And I think in a previous conversation you and I had, we talked about like lightning bolts as like the two charges trying to equalize themselves, but through the easiest path possible. So I think it's your intention and the solution, or the realization of that intention, they attract one another in this way. And so it's not like the person on the other side has to like, spend a lot of time seeking out, okay, how could we do this? Like, let's look at this person. Would they be able to, find a relic in time? No. So let's go to this other person. It's like, once they have the intention to help in this way, the solution just manifests itself. And they, their intention is what nudges that person to then bring the relic to the place where it's needed.
Our metaphors vary somewhat, but the idea is the same, is that you can find what you need really fast. And then get that person in 3 dimensions to start moving. And just I don't get to space to space and time being an illusion until I can't do any better. And so that's just my way. We each have our own models of how we're thinking about these things. So we've done enough of that part of it. So let's go on to another one of your synchronicity stories that suggest that a loved one is doing it. This one was a ghost in the house who's kind of a family member, and that ghost had to be able to be pretty fluid between where the ghost was and the other connections potentially were. So let's go to somebody who's a loved one who's departed and is also not just with a red cardinal. Do you hear cardinals a lot as birds?
Yeah. I think they're so visually striking that they're a good symbol.
They're a good symbol. Okay.
They get your attention.
And butterflies are another one that are really a lot of fun. The one that what you said, they just hang around and won't go away for a while. Well, a lot of other insects will do that too. Yeah. But butterflies are so pretty.
A very brief butterfly story. And I mean, it's not a particularly impressive one, but it spoke to me. And I think this is the way it happens for a lot of people. Several years ago, I had a pet rabbit who died really, really tragically for an illness. And I felt a lot of guilt actually about the death of this rabbit, because I felt like maybe I didn't know enough about how to take care of them. Like, had I caused this somehow? And so the day that this rabbit died, I was sort of like walking my dog around our yard, and we take this long loop around our yard, and we come back to where the rabbit hutch is. And there's this beautiful blue and black butterfly just right on the water dispenser of the rabbit's cage. And it's just sitting there. And I could just feel like it was like the rabbit saying, "It's okay. You didn't do it on purpose. There's no problem here. I lived the life that I wanted to live with you. You took good care of me, and now I'm gone, but it's okay." So I think it's important for people. I think a lot of times when people have these synchronicities related to their loved one, they start analyzing them and like thinking, well, was it really them? Like, is it really that improbable? Like, maybe I'm imagining it. And I really think that that's part of the reason why it's important, first of all, to be aware of how much evidence there is for the afterlife. Like, your synchronicity doesn't have to prove that this person's soul goes on. Like, there's a lot of other evidence that will reassure you about that. What that synchronicity is there to do for you is to provide a very specific emotional connection for you in that moment to the person that you have loved and that is not there physically anymore. It's to sort of open the door for that connection so that you pay attention and allow their soul to speak to you in this deep way. So I really do encourage people, educate yourself about all of the evidence. But when you're in that moment of that encounter, don't worry about analyzing it. Like, just be present. Just relax into it, and because that's when you're actually going to have that deep connection with the person, which is what you want anyway. You don't want to be in your head and in all this like analytical frame of mind. You just want to feel the love that they have for you, and know that they feel the love that you have for them.
That is really, really wonderful, Sharon. That is really, and that one really came out of your heart. I could feel it. And this is where I think you've made it more clear to me, and I hope our viewers and listeners, that while there is the other evidence from other people, a lot of people aren't going to go to mediums. They're not going to have near-death experiences. They're not going to have potentially apparitions, but they are more likely to have the kinds of experiences that you are describing, particularly the butterfly one. And so you're just saying, yeah, it's meager evidence relative to the other, but for you, that's the moment within which you can have the connection with the other person. And you bring up a rabbit, and I bring up my dog, who I still miss from when I was, and I look for evidence for him being around. I pretend like we're walking around in the forest sometimes with him, and I call him. He used to love to find tortoises in the forest and growled a lot. And he just, and my son has a dog who he loves the way, even more than the way I love my dog. So, and they look alike, my son's dog. So it's one of those things. So I know what you mean, and you loved that rabbit, and I loved my dog, and we wonder about whether they're communicating with us. And yes, that butterfly did it for you and your rabbit.
But now I'll go back and answer your original question with that. I always have to give these long preludes to everything.
Well, that was a beautiful one. That was a beautiful prelude. Prelude in D minor or something.
Right, there you go. Yeah, it's a prelude by Chopin. But you asked for an example of one of these stories that is specifically about a loved one bringing a coincidence, and so I think a really good one to talk about is the case of Mandy Seabrook. So this is a case that was researched and reported on in the book "The Children That Time Forgot" by Peter and Mary Harrison, I think. And it's a book that's mostly about children's memories of past lives. But in one of the cases that they investigated, was in a family where a mother had lost a baby very young. I think the baby was 8 or 9 months old, and the child was named Mandy Seabrook. So the child had died, and some years later, the mother, she was actually remarried to a different man. She, I think, had some other children in between, but then she had a daughter who really reminded her of her previous daughter. So she ended up actually giving her the same name, Mandy. But what was really odd is that when that daughter, I should also note that even though she gave her the name of her previous daughter, she never talked about her previous daughter. It just wasn't something that they talked about in the family at all. But then when this second Mandy was 2 years old, they were out driving in a car somewhere, and the little girl pointed over to the cemetery, and she said, "Hey, that's where you put me in the ground that time, and you almost fell on top of me." And it was true that when her daughter had been buried, the mom was on some kind of medication to help her deal with this loss, and it had actually caused her to lose her balance at the gravesite, and she had almost fallen onto the coffin, and I guess somebody sort of saved her at the last minute. So she was like, okay, that's interesting. How would she know that? And then the little girl started talking about how she had been buried with a silver bracelet and a yellow fluffy ball. And the mom remembered that she had been buried with a silver bracelet. She knew that there had been this yellow fluffy ball, but the mom remembered that Mandy's older sibling had wanted to put the yellow fluffy ball in the coffin, but the mom had said no. So then the mom went to this older sibling and she's like, do you remember that yellow fluffy ball? And the sibling's like, yeah, you said not to put that in the coffin, but I snuck it in and it was buried with her. So there was this interesting little piece of verification. So there were some other memories that this Mandy had of apparently being her young child that had died. And then a few years later, just seemingly out of the blue one day, Mandy asked her mom, do you remember the night that I died? There was a bright star in the sky that night. And her mom thought back and she was like, yeah, there was. I do remember a bright star. She was like, it was really bright and very low, hanging over the back garden. She had gone to close the curtains at night to go to sleep, and she had noticed it outside in the backyard. And she had remarked on it to someone at the time because it seemed so odd to her that it was so bright and so low. And Mandy told her, that was my star. It was my sign to you that I would be back. So that's the only case that I have found where a child has had a memory, or anyone has had a memory of intentionally communicating through a coincidence or a sign of some kind. I've found several other cases of memories of communicating through dreams or apparitions or even sort of poltergeist events that can be verified by people who actually experienced them. And this is the one case that I have found where a child actually remembered intentionally using a coincidence to try to send a message. And so for that, I think it's a very valuable and touching case.
How does that differ from a child's memory of past life?
Well, so technically it's called an intermission memory. The researchers call it. So it's not a memory that was part of while they were alive in their body, but it's something that happened once the body had died and they were still aware of what was happening and still attempting to communicate with their family. So yeah, it's an intermission memory technically.
And that's what I've heard from Jim Tucker about, who studies this with children. And I have trouble with calling them synchronicities. They seem to be, but memories of past lives are coincidences.
No, I'm not saying that that her memory is a synchronicity. What I'm saying is her mom experienced this star in the sky that seemed like a strange event. That and her daughter was saying that she was intentionally trying to communicate through that event. So it wasn't an apparition. It wasn't, a dream. It was a sort of symbolic communication, the way that these birds and butterflies and things like that are. And she said, I was trying to tell you that I would be back.
Okay.
Star to do it.
Okay. Because the lead up to it was more what I've heard, the fluffy yellow ball memory.
Yeah. So I don't consider that a coincidence. I consider that's just
the key thing is the star and then the validation of what the star meant. Okay.
Yeah. So I provide the other details to kind of give you the context that she did have these verifiable memories. It wasn't just, she had, she was making this up or something, but then there was this element of this star. And she was like, no, I was trying to tell you something through that.
That becomes yet more profound because you don't know. You think your rabbit intentionally got the butterfly there, but you don't know that as clearly as in this case, where the, let's say, reincarnated soul in the new version of Mandy is able to confirm that what she saw, the mother saw, was intentional.
Right.
And so that makes this more profound, a very profound coincidence in how all this stuff works.
Because we do get those kinds of confirmations through mediums. For example, there are a lot of mediums who are able to tell somebody who has come to them for a reading, your loved one says that they're sending you this bird, or they've been doing this, or that one really cool case where Laura Lynn Jackson is a pretty famous medium. She was telling somebody, so-and-so says that they've been trying to get the family's attention using meteors, and they're still not able to get your attention. And it turned out that, in fact, a member of the family had seen these meteors streaking through the sky, and that was an intentional communication from their loved one, and they didn't have any idea. So mediums do seem to convey this idea that, yeah, they're trying to use these signs and symbols. But this case with Mandy Seabrook is the one case that I know of so far where the person themselves, because they're now reincarnated, is able to testify, yes, I was trying to do that.
I now understand that there was another prelude there. And
all this stuff is so complex, and yeah.
Well, the prelude, is the kind of way you think. You want to have evidence for what the final part of the symphony is. You got to do the build-up instead of just hitting it. And I just go for hitting it just because the way I think. But your evidential way of going is really beautiful. And it's I don't know. There's a lot of things that were wonderful about what you've been talking about as we get to the end of our discussion for today. But you and the rabbit and the butterfly is the most important, salient, heartfelt, wonderful, beautiful notion that you're presenting to us today. Is to be able to, and I'll say it again, is to be able to look at that butterfly or even that star and to be able, but that butterfly is right there and beautiful, to be able to connect with the butterfly and feel the love that goes between the two of you.
Which is amazing. I mean, this is how things work, but I didn't plan to tell that story. I've never told that story publicly before, because it's just, to me, it seems like, it's this little private thing that happened to me, and nobody else is going to find it meaningful. But I was supposed to tell it, and I hope that other people do find it meaningful.
Well, you found one who did.
Yes.
Right here.
Thank you.
Right here. And thank you. Tell us what your books are again, and then we'll say au revoir.
Yeah. So my first book, The Source and Significance of Coincidences, it's about coincidences, but also about a lot of different extraordinary phenomena and experiences that are kind of used as context, as preludes to the coincidence stories. And then my memoir, The Supreme Victory of the Heart, which is about when I first discovered coincidences, I first discovered 33s and the role that they were playing in my life. And then Beyond Death, which is the essay that won the runner-up prize in the Bigelow competition, and as I said, is also available for free as a PDF on the internet.
What are you working on these days?
I'm actually back to doing some academic philosophy, which is kind of shocking to me. I've been out of academia for 13 years. 13 years at this point. I'm writing a pretty theoretical, ambitious book about fundamental questions about how the mind interacts with the physical world.
Well, we're going to talk about that again, because as you know, I have my ideas about how that works, and it's a very important subject. Talking about mind and body, as you put it, mind and brain is where I start, and it needs more addressing than has been done. It's remarkable how many Psi researchers don't really pay attention to this question. Oh, it just happens. you get the thing from there and it comes in and then you say it. Well, how does it go from you thought it or you heard it and then you can say it and act on it? Well, it's an important question, and you're addressing that. And
I think it's a very important question in like mainstream philosophy of mind that they don't know how to answer too. And I think if we put that together with the mystery of these parapsychological phenomena, then we might actually be able to solve it, or at least make a little progress.
So the title of the book is Sharon Rawlette Solves a Mind-Body Problem.
Yes, that's it.
That's the name of that one. Well, Sharon, thank you very, very much for being on the show with me. And it's a really delight talking with you. I'm glad we got your butterfly and your rabbit too.
Yeah, thanks for pulling that out of me.
You're welcome.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.